What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so this is a requested video from one of my subscribers. And he wanted me to do a video inquiring. This isn't etched in stone, just an opinion. But he wanted me to do a video, give my opinion on, in the event that the 2012 Boston Celtics had beaten that Miami Heat team that year. If they had beaten them, could they have beaten the OKC Thunder in the NBA Finals? And, I mean, look, to me, if they had somehow, because they came within one game of beating the Miami Heat. If they had beaten the Thunder in the finals, that would have been one of the great championship teams of all time. That would have been a team that did it on grit and determination. Because, in my opinion, this was not the same Celtic team from 2 years ago, and definitely from 4 years ago when they won the title. And when they've done it, like I said, grit, because they would have done it chiefly because of their defense. And they would have basically had to grit it out because age was definitely had caught up with that team. Okay? But I have to be honest with you, I don't really see them beating OKC. Just for different reasons. Two primary reasons. Number one, age. Remember, this is when Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook were pups. They were young. They were all in their early to mid-20s at that time. Whereas the core of the Boston Celtics was old. Paul Pierce was 34. Kevin Garnett was 36. Ray Allen was 36, going on 37. Their bench wasn't very strong compared to, the years before. So they weren't exactly the deep team that they once was. And they had a lot of injuries. KG was dealing with injuries. Pierce had an injury. Ray Allen was dealing with bone spurs. They had signed Jeff Green, I think, and then Jeff Green had a undiagnosed aortic aneurysm, so he didn't play for him. Avery Bradley, he was out with injury at that time. Some of their bench players had injuries, and Kendrick Perkins, was no longer with the Boston Celtics. He was with the OKC Thunder. So I don't see them beating that team just from a matchup perspective. Now, the advantage that Boston would have had would be experience. So, I would give them a couple of games just based upon the lack of experience by the OKC Thunder. I could see the series going maybe 6 games tops, but I don't think that they will beat OKC. Not in this scenario. I just think this would be a situation where a team was just too beaten up at this point. Remember when they won the championship, even then, 4 years earlier, they were all pretty much, except for Rondo, they were all on the wrong side of 30 then, but close enough to their primes to get things done. And remember, a lot of series then in that playoff run, they shouldn't have won as far as they did. And that matter of fact, when I think about it, I think Boston had 2 consecutive rounds going 7 games. Let me see. Yeah. So in the semifinals, they went 7 games against the Philadelphia 76ers, and they went 7 games against Miami Heat, ultimately losing. You know what I'm saying? And if I remember, wasn't that the series when Paul Pierce hit the game winner? And I think it might have been, was it game 5? Yeah, I think it was game 5. I think it was game 5 against the Miami Heat. But this was the last somewhat great year that Boston squad had. The very next year, they went basically 500. And I think you could argue, too, that Boston may have benefited from a shortened season. That was the lockout year. It was only 66 games that year. They went 39-27. Their defense was still great. They had a number 1 defensive rating in the NBA, but offensively, Boston was starting to fall apart. They only averaged 91.8 points per game that year. Sometimes their offense looked very, very sloppy, but they were still able to go 12 games above 500. Contrast that to the year that they went to the finals just 2 years before that, and they averaged about 99 points a game. In the championship year, they averaged over 100. So you definitely saw a decline in the play of their trio, in particular Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett had went from the Defensive Player of the Year and an MVP caliber player in 2008 to being on the downside in the finals in 2010 and getting outplayed by Pau Gasol after clearly outplaying Pau Gasol in 08. And by this point in time, Kevin Garnett was, played in 60 of the 66 games, but he averaged 15.8 points and 8.2 rebounds, 2.9 assists. This was a guy who, at one point in time, Kevin Garnett would give you something like 20. Well, this is when he was in Minnesota, obviously, but he would give you, 23, 24 points, 13, 14 rebounds, 4 or 5 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals. This was a guy that was a perennial stat stuffer. Even in his Boston years, earlier years, Garnett would get you like 17, 18, and 11 and 12 rebounds. So his level of play and consistency was going downhill. Jermaine O'Neal, I think, was on the roster in the regular season, appearing in only 35 games. This is the last few games that he played in. Greg Stiesma had injuries and didn't really play much in the playoffs that year. Whereas OKC was young, athletic. I just think their youth would have been too much for Boston at that stage, especially at that stage of the playoffs. I think Boston just was worn out. So I don't see them beating the Thunder in that playoff if they had somehow beaten Miami, who they had familiarity with, especially going against LeBron James. They have more familiarity going up against Miami. But the Thunder, I think they were just all wrong for them. Whereas Miami was a pretty young team still in their prime for the most part. So they benefited from that. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I think Chris Bosh was hurt either for all or most of that playoff series Miami played against the Celtics. So they benefited from that too, and they still lost. So yeah, I think Boston would have lost to the Thunder had they played them in the finals. That's just my opinion of it. Tell me what you guys think.